If you're anything like me, you might have spent time trying to figure out what your life was like before your life began. Or to phrase that in a less pretentious way, how all the things that became part of your life once you were born determined the shape of what your life would be. So like for many of us, a big part of that would be our family, what dynamics existed, what were the people and forces and dynamics that created us, and then how have they sort of defined the limits or the trajectory or the possibilities or even the secrets or the facts or the supposed facts that are later sort of complicated or deleted or exposed, that, you know, all these things that we tackle with, that is not proper English, all the things we deal with and tackle and are foxed and vexed by as we go from childhood to our teenage years to adulthood. If you're anything like me, these things will have occupied your mind and you might find it interesting to read about them, and you might even occasionally write about them. If you're like me, you'll certainly think about them. And if you're like me in this sense, then you'll probably enjoy this book that we're talking about for this episode. It is Zhang Yueran's Cocoon, and the guest for this episode is its translator, Jeremy Tiang. Really exciting stuff. Now, normally this is where I would hurriedly take us to the TrChFic news section, but first I'm going to do a little promo for this show's Patreon, just because I put some good stuff up there recently. So I'll just run you through some of the episodes that I have queued up on the Patreon for the coming weeks and months. Right, so the next episode lined up to come out on this show's Patreon is James Trapp's bonus question answer. So from the episode on Graft, I asked the question to James that I snipped out. That's the next one, coming out in mid-May. The end of May, there's another bonus question. It's my bonus question that I asked Natasha Bruce about Dorothy Tsay's. Well, a little interesting question about Dorothy Tsay. I asked Natasha, if you could put her in a room with anyone, who would it be? Midway through June is the next queued Patreon episode. It's my preliminary thoughts. It's my preliminary thoughts on Qiu Xiaolong's book, Murder in the Time of COVID. If you want to hear what I thought about that, you can get it there. That's of particular interest because I was given a reader's or a reviewer's proof copy in advance, I think, for a book reviewers event I'm going to actually next week. So maybe that won't be quite as huge a scoop by June 15th, but I'm a fairly early digger into this stuff. Now, for the end of June, I have an episode queued up. It's my post-read thoughts on a less recent book, The Borrowed, Chan Ho-kei's crime Hong Kong series of like mini novellas stacked together into one wider sort of trajectory of Hong Kong policing style story. That's that one. 2 weeks after that, I have my post-read thoughts on Kevin Chun's Ghost Town, a piece of Taiwanese, very literary fiction. And then 2 weeks after that, we've got the answer to the bonus question in this episode that you're listening to right now on Zhang Yueran's Cocoon. So that's a whole queue that's going to carry the show's Patreon through all the way to summer. And of course, behind these, there's more than 100 other bonus episodes. If you'd like to listen to these, you can go to patreon.com/TrChFic. That is TrChFic. If you enjoy the show, this is a great way to help support the show and then get something back in turn. And of course, if you sign up, it's $1 a month minimum to sign up, and you're not obliged to stick around forever. If you have a really extractive mindset, or if you just don't have more than $1 to spare, you can sign up, download everything, and then quit after a month. And you know what? I still got $1 out of that. It's a bit, I would prefer it if you could make it a recurring donation. But the point is, it's a way to support the show and for you to enjoy these bonus episodes that I put a bit of time into making. They are a bit more rough than the main show, but you can hear my thoughts sort of off the top of my head very often, which is I can't really say what it is because I'm not objective on myself. But if you enjoy listening to me talk, there's more of that there. Okay, enough promo. Onto the TrChFic news, the translated Chinese fiction news. So 3 items today. The first one is a piece of meta news. Not talking about myself, but I am talking about the show. So I've been telling my guests, and indeed you listeners, that there is a link to a resource for like a stash of all these episodes that is on a cloud service that's not blocked in China. But just this week, I thought I would check to see, like, I would run the show's feed, like its MP3 file URLs, and the show's homepage, which is a WordPress, through like these checker sites that can check if your link is blocked in China. It's blocked by the Great Firewall, and I found that none of the show links, whether it's the MP3 file, the feed, or like the homepage, none of them appear to be blocked by the firewall, which would mean the show is not blocked in China, except on Himalaya, where it was taken down. So I'm assuming that's all accurate, and that's contrary to what I've been telling people, slightly embarrassingly. But yeah, if you'd like to test that out and tell me, like if you are in the PRC and you want to do me a solid, try accessing, well, tell me if you're able to access the download, the MP3 files and the homepage through either your app or just directly through your browser. That would really interest me. Okay, self-indulgence over. The next two news items are actual news items. So the first is that a new Legend of the Condor Heroes film is in the works to be directed by Tsui Hark. I think he's a Hong Kong director. This is Condor Heroes being Jin Yong's wuxia epic classic. It's a very well beloved series. I did an episode on it you can listen back to with translator Zhang. That's a great episode, and for many this is a really well beloved series, so exciting to hear that a new film is on the way. Okay, now final news item. This is something you can read. Asymptote, I think that's how you pronounce it, a journal or a publication for translated literature, have put up on their website an excerpt of some Taiwanese lit. It's an excerpt of the author Wu Mingyi's novella Cloudland. You can read that up there, translated and in the original Chinese. Very exciting. Yes, and if you want more Wu Mingyi, you can go find my episode on his book, The Man with the Compound Eyes. I'm going to tell you all my episodes are great, but I do think that was a good one. Okay, that's the end of the translated Chinese fiction news. Nothing else to say, except on with the show. Let's hear my interview with Jeremy Tiang about Zhang Yueran's Cocoon. Enjoy. So on the show, we have a returning guest. It's Jeremy Tiang. Jeremy, really exciting to have you here. Last time you were on the show, it was alongside the author you translated, Yang to talk about Strange Beasts of China. What have you been up to since then?
I knew you were going to ask that, and I meant to look up when exactly that was, so I could try to recollect what had happened since, but I forgot to do that.
That would be sort of spring, maybe 2020?
Oh, God. So
or no,
we must...
2021. Sorry, 2021.
Yes. Okay. Well, the pandemic has done strange things to my memory. All time is one time. So I've been quite busy. I've started doing more teaching. I'm teaching a translation workshop at Columbia, and I'll be in the UK this summer to do the BCLT summer school in Taiwanese literature, which I've taught for the last 2 years. I've translated a number of books. I don't know, baked a lot of cakes, judged the Booker Prize, been judged by the Booker Prize. I feel like I'm burbling. I hope you'll edit this so I come coherent and composed.
I've seen a lot of the cakes on Instagram, and they're nice cakes.
It's the product of just being at home a lot more and really liking to eat cake.
Yeah, I live with my girlfriend, and yeah, she was doing a lot of baking as well. She likes to make them and eat them. I like to eat them, so it's a healthy relationship.
Excellent. What else has been happening in your life, Angus?
Oh, lots of stuff. The pod has trickled on. It did pretty well during pandemic. I was able to get through a lot more episodes. But since you last spoke to me, I've changed job twice. So I jumped to a pharma industry trade magazine, and now I'm semi-inside the University of Manchester as an editor, a deputy editor, for an organization that helps educate pharmacists. So I've accidentally become a sort of biology editor somehow, but I don't hate it. It's pretty fun.
That's exciting. That's quite a shift.
Yeah, that's the professional side. I've bought my first house.
Oh,
Yeah.
congratulations. I didn't think that was possible anymore.
Well, let's just say I didn't do it alone. Put it like that. We're here to talk about a book, so let's do that. It's Zhang Yueran's Cocoon, and you are the translator. That's why you're here. So, who is Zhang Yueran, and well, we know she writes fiction, but how would you characterize that fiction?
Well, Zhang Yueran is in that group of people known as the 80后 or post-80s writers. That is the people born after 1980. Um, or, or rather, because I was recently corrected by an author who was very insistent that she was a 85后 author or a post-85 author. So I guess 80后now means born between 1980 and 1985. And a number of writers in that generation became very famous very young. Zhang Yueran was one of them. She published 5 books by the time she was in her early 20s, and all of them had sold very well. She's in that cohort of people like Tiang and Guo Jingming and Yan who kind of then had to find a second act because, as with child stars, you kind of are known for one thing, but then you grow out of that. And what is the next thing? So Yueran then took 10 years of publishing. She was writing all the time. She continued editing Li, new writing, her literary journal, and publishing short stories. But she didn't publish a book for a whole decade. And part of that was her reinventing herself as a writer. And then she broke her publishing silence with Cocoon and a collection of short stories at the same time. And they're recognizably operating in a different register. So her early work is very symbol driven. Like Jeanette Winterson, who was a big influence in her, she draws from elements of fable and fairy tale. Um, they are very eventful, melodramatic, kind of psychodramas. And Cocoon and the more recent short stories are much more subtle. They go more into psychological depth. In Cocoon, there are stretches where most of the action is internal. She's no longer quite relying on the big melodramatic events, although there are still some fairly significant events in the novel. But she's now writing at a more measured and more internal pace. So that's who Zhang Yueran was and is. And I have no doubt that she will continue to evolve as a writer.
Right, great. So there's the theme of time coming up again. Coming up again. You said earlier, all time is now one time, but also we as people we persist and we change over time as well, and that might come up when we're talking about the characters in the book. So that's Zhang Yueran. That's what she writes, and that's what she's written. What about yourself? What's your relationship to her work?
So I met Yueran in 2011. We were both doing a writing residency at the University of Iowa called the International Writing Program, where they gather a group of 30-something writers from all over the world and put them in this tiny university town in the Midwest for 3 months. And it's a little bit like a reality show. You're kind of cut off from everything there, and you write, or you get to know life in the Midwest, or you get to know your fellow writers. And we kind of became a little Chinese clique, me and Yueran, and also there at the same time with Dorothy Say and Su Weichen. And sidebar, as a result, I'm actually in Dorothy Say's book. I don't know if you've looked at the afterword. I actually have it here.
Which book is this?
Owlish.
Owlish, right.
Yeah.
Not actually read that one yet.
Oh, well, when you get to the afterword, she will talk about her life in Iowa City and refer to a Singaporean writer with an impeccable British accent. And I regret to reveal that that is me.
Oh no, the secret's out. Is that have we got the first what's the word? Are we the first to take that revelation to press, or is that an open secret?
I mean, anyone who wanted to find out could look at what Dorothy was doing in Iowa City in 2011, and it would quickly become clear that I was the only Singaporean present in Iowa City in 2011. But yeah, sure, take it as a scoop, Angus. So anyway, me, and Dorothy and Wei Chen would just hang out all the time, speaking in Chinese, because Yueran wasn't that comfortable speaking in English, and Wei Chen basically spoke no English. Um, and we got taken under the wing of Nie Hualing, the grande dame of Chinese literature, who lives in Iowa City and was partly responsible for the founding of the International Writing Program. And it was a formative experience for, oh, and Jennifer Feely was there too. It was a formative experience for me because I hadn't really had that kind of encounter with Chinese literature and people who were writing in a very different literary tradition to what I'd grown up with in Singapore. And I was at that point starting to think about translation. So when Yueran said her work had never been translated into English, I just asked if I could do it. And we sat in on a couple of translation workshops at the university. I did a short story of hers, which was published in the Iowa Review. And then I translated her novel, The Promise Bird, 是鸟, which got published by Math Paper Press in Singapore. And that was my first publication. So
Right.
I kind of started the whole thing.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, I did a teeny bit of preparation for this episode, and one of the things involved just seeing, is there any other translations of Zhang Yueran's work out there? And I saw this, no, actually, you know what? I'm lying. It wasn't preparation. I had finished Cocoon and I was trying to add it to my bookshelf app to log my completed books. And a few other, when I put in Cocoon, I didn't get any of Zhang Yueran's books. I got other stuff about Cocoons. So I added her name, and then that showed up, The Promise Bird. And I think there's another one from Math Paper Press.
Yeah, a short story collection called 10 Loves.
Yes.
Which is 10 extremely twisted romances, almost anti-romances. Yes, well, Math Paper Press never distributed outside of Singapore, really. And they no longer, I believe they no longer exist. So those those two translations have vanished into the ether.
Mysterious. Yes, I think I had a look at their website, and some of the website was alive and functioning, and other pages were sort of dead. So I figured something like that maybe happened. But yeah, maybe they'll return from the ether someday. That would be nice.
I mean, you translate a book, you let it out into the world, and hopefully it finds its way to readers, but you can never tell.
For sure. Yeah, I feel the same about the podcast sometimes. It just transmits and then you don't know where it goes. The numbers always look a little bit meager, but I often run into, I suppose it's because of the people I talk to, I run into people who say they're listeners. Like Natasha on the last episode revealed that she'd binged the show during lockdown, which is, or I've been paid to host events, and the guests say, "Oh, your voice. I never knew what you look like, but I recognize that voice," and it's a great feeling. Maybe there's an equivalent for authors and translators. Anyway, I'm being self-indulgent. I'll take us to discuss the book. We can start with the sort of basics, the shell of the cocoon, as it were. So the book has a sort of a framing device that frames a fairly particular structure. Yes, we start off with Bi Jia Qi, I think, the female, the main female character of the two main characters. She arrives at feels like a semi-abandoned old large home in a hospital compound, if I'm remembering right. And she visits her father, who's been bedbound for a long time and is on his way out of this world. And then fairly soon she's joined by our male character, Chong Gong, and they start sort of reminiscing about their lives and drinking. But the reminiscences are the sort of the meat of the book. It has a sort of a call and response seems wrong, ping pong seems wrong, but they take turn having chapters that they narrate, basically. That's the structure. I think I've fairly accurately summarized that. And at the end of the book, we have the end of their evening hangout. So in a way, the whole thing takes place over one evening. So I'll ask you, Jeremy, how, I suppose I've described the how, but maybe you could go into more of that. The how and the why of Zhang Yueran's use of this frame and this structure. Why is it there? What's it for? What does it do?
Yes, it's her grandfather, not her father. In
Ah,
other
right,
words,
grandfather. Yes,
um,
yeah.
but what is family? What is family is indeed a big question in the book. Yes, as you say, it's not quite call and response, and it's not quite a realistic conversation
Mm.
because they're speaking in these big chunks. And if you were to take it absolutely literally, which, to be clear, you're not meant to, it would look like they had just met and over the course of a single night just monologued at each other with their recollections. Um, but the book, I think, does take place in the course of a single night, but is in a space between dream and memory, where the encounter of these two childhood friends after so many years apart, just trickles this flood of recollection and also revelation, because now they're finally old enough to make sense of the things they experienced and the things they learned all those years ago, but as young children just didn't have the maturity to process. So that's probably a version of this that she could have written that's more real life, where sorry, your listeners can't hear, but I'm doing air quotes on real life, where they are talking as two people would after meeting for a long time and going, oh, did you see that? Oh,
Mm.
right. So that's what happened. And there's a little bit of that. She puts in just enough to remind us that this is meant to be a conversation. And then she abstracts it so that there are these chunks that are just pure memory, that are being dredged out of them. And the idea is that they stay up all night doing this. And by dawn, they've learned everything there is to know about each other. And they finally got out all of the secrets of the past. And then, is there a way forward? We don't know. We're left on a point of suspense.
Yes, indeed. Yeah. And what I didn't mention is that they're from two, um, I think intricately interlinked is a fair description. Two very intricately interlinked families, and our meetup is happening in, I guess, the present day, so to speak, around our present day today, and the memories go back, I guess, mainly through their childhoods and then their adolescences. But we do the events reach even further back into the Cultural Revolution. So I don't know if you want to say anything about how the families are intertwined. I would say, and a tip to the readers, if you pick this one up, kind of make a little bit of effort keeping tabs on whose grandparent is who. That'll help you enjoy the book.
I really tried with that. I think one grandmother is always granny and the other is
Mm.
always grandma. But yes, I do keep track of the grandparents, because that's a key part of the story. I don't actually think I can say how the two families are intertwined because that's a giant spoiler.
Yes,
Um,
a central mystery.
I can't say how the two families are connected because that's a giant spoiler, but I will say that that connection is both the engine of the book and also actually immaterial in the bigger picture. Because although this has been presented as a mystery story, and I suppose formally it is, in that it is a book where the key dramatic question is who committed an act of attempted murder. Um, but at the same time, Yueran isn't that interested in this question because it's more what that murder reveals about the wider society. So Yueran, being a post 80s person, was born just after the Cultural Revolution, about 5 years after it ended. And I think for that generation of people, the Cultural Revolution exerts this mystical hold because it's this cataclysmic event that you personally did not experience, but you can see the wreckage everywhere around you. But also, there's no way to process it because no one wants to talk about it, can't talk about it, will only talk about it in certain ways. Then you have the genre of 伤痕文学, scar literature, which, as the name implies, is basically trauma-based writing about the Cultural Revolution. But I don't know if that's the most helpful lens because it's only one angle and kind of presents the worst aspects of that decade. And I'm going to do a sidebar, and you can cut this if it's too much.
Okay.
But this was in 2012. I went to Beijing to see Yueran. I think this was after I translated The Promised Bird, and she basically kidnapped me. We were supposed to meet for dinner. She picked me up in her car and she said, I have a friend I want you to meet, and drove me to the outskirts of Beijing, to Xiangshan, where she introduced me to Zhou Xingzi, the playwright and screenwriter. And we went for a walk in the park and admired his calligraphy, and he took us to dinner. And he gave me his book, Jiu Dong, Ninth Building, which is a collection of vignettes about the Cultural Revolution. And I started looking for a publisher for, and it actually took a full decade before Honford Starr, who didn't even exist when I first encountered the book, agreed to publish it, and then subsequently Open Letter in the US got the North American rights. And so as it happened, I was translating these two books more or less in parallel, Ninth Building, which is about the Cultural Revolution, and Cocoon, which is about its aftermath. And what I loved about Ninth Building was it was a very quiet account of the Cultural Revolution, which in some way made it more devastating. It wasn't about the struggle sessions and the torture and the murders and the destruction of property. It was about the grinding monotony of day-to-day life when everything had stopped and you weren't allowed to do anything, and you were sent to the countryside to work on the land, and your whole life was just put on hold for an entire decade. So Zhou Xingzi and many others like him basically just lost a chunk of their life from their mid-teens to their mid-20s. And how you recover from that, how when society reopens, you just go, okay, we're just going to pick up where we left off. And then what happens to the generation after that? And of course, in Cocoon, that is a central part of Li Jiaqi's family dilemma, that her father, who is from the city, married her mother, who's from the countryside, because he was sent down there and it looks like he would be there forever. And then when the Cultural Revolution ended and they came back to the city, her mother, being a countryside person, just could not adjust to life in Zinan. And so that was the central rift in their family and the source of a lot of the tragedy that comes after that. So there are all these ways in which the Cultural Revolution is present in Cocoon, even though it's not really referenced directly. And yet all of the significant events in the book really took place before either of the protagonists were born.
Right. I may have brought this one up before on the podcast, but I'll mention it again now, whether or not I did. In my third year of university, I did a module on children's literature, and that was one of the more interesting ones I did. And I remember one of the papers we were given to read had quite an interesting point to make about a sort of commonality between a lot of children's lit, especially stuff that's maybe for older children, is that often if there's a mystery, the drama and the mystery of the story are about finding out where you came from. Because when you're a kid, it's not long since you entered the world from the nothingness. So the central mystery of your life is what was there before I was here. And, the first place to look is probably your family. And I suppose it so happens with the Cultural Revolution, it's very hard to separate. Well, it's not hard. That's a poor phrase. The Cultural Revolution is not really a separate thing from your family, because the way it affected so many people so directly. Like if I was to think of the big historical event that came not long before I was born, it would probably be the end of the Cold War. But that's had nothing to do with my family, really. There's still something mysterious about it, but it's not really. It's like a little leaf compared to the mountainous effect that this would have had on these main characters. I was going to ask you later, but I think I'll ask now, since like trauma, scar literature and all that has come up. While like running and working on this podcast, I've read a lot a lot of stories that are set in or around or reflecting on the Cultural Revolution, but they've almost always, or maybe have always, been by older authors, usually men, and they usually have a very different tone from this book. So I don't know. I just wondered, as a reader or a translator, if you felt there was a really distinct difference in how these things are handled in Cocoon, be it in style or just the choices of things to focus on. You mentioned that it's maybe a bit quieter, but how about just like Yueran's stamp as a writer versus, say, someone like Yuhua?
Well, a lot of that is generational, I think. They're just reading different things, participating in different conversations. I would say perhaps the more interesting difference is between Yueran and her peers.
Right.
Because a lot of the writers of Yueran's generation are writing these books that are set in a kind of very abstract space. Like Strange Beasts of China is set in this kind of somewhat imaginary city that may or may not be based in a real place. Tiang's early novels, the quartet of Dragon City novels are set in Dragon City, which is this imaginary place that doesn't really seem connected to anywhere. It's just this disembodied location. Whereas Yueran is writing about a very real Jiǎn, the city she grew up in, and a very real past, and really digging into the history of everything that's come before. So this feels like, and I don't want to exaggerate, she's not alone in that, but it does feel like a shift in tempo for her, even from her earlier work, where a lot of it is set in a somewhat magical space, like The Promised Bird, which is set in medieval Southeast Asia. Really a lot of it is set on a tropical island in a pirate ship, and it's intense and swashbuckling and great fun, but kind of not connected to real life, whereas this is intimately about people's real existences and just having to deal with the fabric of history and generational trauma. I guess perhaps comparing her to people like Yuhua and Mo Yan, and that whole cohort, she has distance. Because she didn't live through it, she can maybe take a step back and view it with some clarity. She can look at the lingering effects, not what happened at the time, but what happened in the decades after, and how, because there's never really been a reckoning, the trauma lies buried, festers, much like a nail in someone's brain.
Indeed, yes. Never know what the nail's gonna do to you once it's in there. I will ask you the next question I had written down, rather than flowing. Actually, no, I have one in my head I wanted to ask before I take one from the screen. I want to ask another question about The Promised Bird. Do you think there's a common thread between those older works of Yueran's and Cocoon, or are they really? Is there nothing that really they have in common apart from having been written by the same person?
Well, if you look at The Promised Bird and you look at Cocoon, and a lot of her short stories, I think the common thread is they're about women who refuse to fit in, who don't fit in, who won't be well behaved, who won't be silent, who won't do what they're expected to. And that's something that runs through all her work. It's kind of defiance that sometimes appears self-destructive, but is ultimately about refusing to accept the position that society has allocated to them.
Right. You've set me up really nicely for my next question, which was about favorite characters. So I already named the two main characters who take turns telling their story, Chonggong and Li Jiaqi. And out of the two, I definitely felt most excited to turn the page when I saw the heading Li Jiaqi, and I knew it was one of her chapters. Not to knock on Chonggong's chapters, they were fine, but I enjoyed the Jiaqi ones a bit more, maybe because she did go a bit more off the rails. And I do remember there were quite a few interesting secondary characters there's a whole sequence where we're in an apartment with a mother and daughter. The jiǎchis crash there, and we have the mother is I guess she's like a grandma sort of age, and she appears to have dementia or something like that. And her daughter is I don't know what the right adjective is, like dissolute, cynical, just quite a screwed up character, but is also very sharply drawn. So probably that moment, those three would be my favorites. But like, how about you? Did you have favorite characters?
I mean, I guess looking at it now, I can choose favorites. Like at the translating it, um, you kind of have to have empathy with everyone and care for all the characters as you would a writer if you were a writer. Um, but when I look back at it now, I feel a lot of affection for Cheng Gong's aunt, um, who is very much in the background and is notable for her complete failure to leave Jinan. She attempts to run away, she tries to break free, and she just can't do it. She's just so stuck in this place. And I think she's the most obvious symptom of something that afflicts a lot of people in this novel, which is the inability to move or get away from their circumstances. And even the ones that do manage to find themselves being pulled back. But yeah, just the ways in which she expresses her frustration and rage with her situation and yet cannot change it.
I have two questions here I'm going to package together because I think we've sort of touched on both of these, but I think we could go a bit deeper. I wanted to ask first if the book is in your mind a challenging read, and then also what you think the literary style of the book is, and then I'll ask you after we've done this. I'll ask you about how you went about translating it. But yeah, what do you make of the style, and what do you make of like how much the readers got to put in? I noticed in the front cover sleeve, there's a very cool thing the publisher's done. They've got a quote from the author, a quote from yourself, the translator, and one from the publisher. And you said that you can't wait for Anglophone readers to come under the book's spell. And I thought that that was a really close match from my experience reading the book. I was reading it at a train station and on a train, often on my phone actually, and something about that was very spellbinding. So yeah, is it spellbinding? Is it something else? Is it easy read? Is it tough? Because I found it easy and tough at the same time.
I suppose it's easy in that it's very fluid. And Yueran is such a good storyteller that she draws you in and you just want to know what's happened next. So in that sense, I suppose a book is easy to read if you can't put it down, if it makes you keep going on. I would say that the mode is lyrical. She's spellbinding because she's almost creating a kind of music. And it's hard to describe, but as I was translating it, I felt this atmosphere that I then tried to transmit in English. But it's this version of China that is very much Yueran's. So it's like trying to see the place through her eyes in that very specific and particular way, and to recreate that, to enter into her world, and to make others see it the way she does. So it's challenging, I suppose, in the sense that it's not told in a linear fashion, and you do have to do some work to put the pieces together and thread all the various flashbacks into chronological order to understand fully what has happened. All the pieces are there, and by the end, you have everything you need to understand what has gone before. But because it's not told in a straightforward fashion, it might take a little thought to make all of the connections. Although that said, I feel like if you don't make all the connections, it doesn't fully matter, because each individual moment has its own emotional impact. And by the end, it's about the journey that Jiaci and Cheng Gong have been on, and not so much solving the mystery.
For sure, yeah. I don't know if there's a term for a novel about the two people growing up and being sort of formed was it morally, spiritually, intellectually, in the so-called Bildungsroman format or genre. You have one character, usually a boy, develops in all these ways, but you have something a bit like this, but it's like a twin spiral. It's two people growing up. What you said about the world of the story being like Zhang Yueran's China, Zhang Yueran's Jinan, I I really felt that as well. Like in your translation, I could tell it was really subtle and really I don't know if stylish is the right word. It had a really powerful mood. And it's only now, if I think about it, I can try and describe what the mood is. I'd say the mood's probably moody. It felt like kind of a very subtle, moody sort of book. Like if you were setting it to a soundtrack, you might have like something low key, like I don't know, jazz, like a muted trumpet or something. It was quiet jazz, not loud, crazy jazz. And not that I really know my jazz, but yeah, it's really subtle and really for I don't know, for me anyway as a reader, that what you just described matches my experience. Powerful aura.
Yeah, there's always fog on the ground, no matter the season. Things a bit muffled and distant. I don't know. I could feel it. I don't know if I can put it into words right now.
Hmm. Well, you did put it into words. You translated it. It's just not spoken words. I'll ask you now about the translation. I think you said in the that quote I mentioned earlier that you had to find a new voice for Yueran, which makes sense based on what you've told us, because this is her trying to reinvent herself. So what did the process of inventing a new voice? How was that? Was it like a problem solving exercise or a bit more artistic than
No,
that?
it's more instinctual. I
Hmm.
I think this is any translation. I just read it and I start to hear it in English in my mind, and I just keep going until it becomes clear enough that I can put it down on the page. So I guess I tried to tune into these two characters and how their voices were different from each other. They're actually very similar. And I felt that I wanted to preserve that whilst also helping the reader to distinguish between them and to remember what time period we were in. So a lot of it took place in their childhood in the 80s and early 90s. So not to do anything too contemporary. Um, and yeah, just kind of, sense the vibes of the original and replicate them in English.
Right. Yes, I was tempted to use the word vibes earlier, a vibes-based story, but I didn't want to sound too flippant. Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, in the episode I'm just editing right now, I brought up the term aphantasia, which is I think that's possibly a trendy word right now online. It's an inability to uh, think in pictures, like to create mental images, because yeah, I even looked up the Mandarin for it and promptly forgot it. It's got the character for Juan, like Ke Juan de Juan in there, and I remember the third character is the character for sickness, but I can't remember how that's written or said. But anyway, the translator was saying how he sort of thinks of comes up with the right word or the right tone and was describing mental images. And now we're looking at you've mentioned another side of it, the sort of the mysterious process that we think verbally or even yeah, I guess there's the verbal side where you're thinking in language and that sort of blurs into your ability to hear someone's voice. And I don't know, these things, I find it so interesting, but trying to latch on to how people think is like grabbing at water. It's
Yes, but I guess also because I have aphantasia, uh,
oh right.
so I can't really do that thing of you read a description and then you picture it, and so
Huh.
I kind of have to draw a picture or use Google image search and some combination of Google image search and Google Earth to kind of build a collage that becomes my image board. Um, like obviously I can see recognize images when I'm looking at them. I just kind of
Mhm.
need to have them in front of me. So
Interesting.
yeah, I don't know. I had always thought I was odd because people would talk about reading books and imagining what the characters would look like or seeing scenes from the books. I don't have that. Um,
Oh, right.
so yeah, so I build these. I don't use Pinterest, but effectively they're Pinterest boards.
Right. Right. Cool. I think when I first heard the definition of aphantasia, I had a panic moment of felt self-diagnosis. But I think for me, it's I do automatically form mental images. It's just if I force them to appear, they of course slip right out of my grasp. But I don't. Who knows? I would only know if that matches other people's experience if I grilled them, and even then, couldn't really be sure because other people are always a mystery in their own cocoons. I think that is that set of questions done. We're probably about ready to go on to the miscellaneous questions, the slightly more fun ones or silly ones. So I'll stop reaching for the profound and I'll just ask you if you could suggest a Chinese word of the day for this novel and this episode, what would it be?
So this is probably cheating, but my word would be jiǎn, which is the title of the novel, and means cocoon. Partly because it's as a character, it's so mystical. It's the character of a chong or insect, worm, bug with a 草字头, which is the radical for plant. Um,
Right.
and because I've been watching The Last of Us, that I think
Ah,
of those ants that get taken over by cordyceps, which is not at all what the character is meant to invoke, and yet I feel like it's there. I don't really know the etymology of this, why a cocoon is an insect that has is somehow a plant, unless maybe because it's attached to a tree. It's the
yes.
grass radical. But also, the word jiǎn is used to mean callus, as in the calluses you get on your fingers. And
Ah,
I have a writer's callus because I do a lot of drafts by hand. So I've kind of got a callus on my thumb where you would, where I hold my pen. So I like that that's that resonance as well.
nice. I'm having a really tragic moment here where I remembered the character because I remembered it had the Chong bug in it because I looked at it a few times in the copyright page, and now I've typed in Jian into my Pinyin keyboard and it's not coming up. Must be way down there, and I don't have the ability to draw the strokes. But I'm going to pat myself on the back for realizing that was, and you've done me a solid. You sent it to me. Yes, I was begging without asking there, wasn't I? Thanks. I'll take us to the next one. So if you could set the if we were making Cocoon the TV show or Cocoon the movie, and I feel like it might be suited to TV format, but that's a whole other question. If we were setting music to the soundtrack, do you have a piece of music you would pick?
Um, do you know the singer Pu Shu?
I don't.
He has this song called Susan's Dancing Shoes. 苏珊的舞鞋。山给的舞鞋，等待他离开倦怠世界，像个念。那天是个多云的夜晚，他分了我便飞上了天。And it's really hard to describe. Susan has a pair of shoes and she likes dancing, and one day she dances up into the night sky and disappears. And that feels exactly right for the for the kind of ephemeral feeling of the book. Like it might all blow away, like the whole thing might vanish in an instant. It's really hard to explain what the song means, which I like. Like it makes a kind of emotional sense to me. But if you try to deconstruct it, you're like, is she actually flying? What's going on? And it's best not to think about that too much.
Yeah, music's got that. I mean, I was saying before about how thought is this hard thing to grab onto, and yeah, music is just like that. It's hard to say how just sound, even without words, how sound can make you feel how you do. I've picked a song that starts out nice and subtle, then maybe does get a bit too cinematic for the story to quite work, but it is from an album called Late Night Cinema. Uh, it's by an artist, or a pair of artists who go by the name Blue Sky, Black Death, and the track's called Forgive Me. It's a whole album of instrumentals. I knew there would be one track on it that had the right sort of mood, something kind of mournful, quiet, maybe a little jazzy. And I saw that when I was trying to remind myself of the names of all these tracks, I saw one was called Forgive Me, which felt so right for the book. And sure enough, Forgive Me had just the right sort of mood for Cocoon. So I won't say any more. I'll just say that links to myself and Jeremy's choice will be in the show notes. Listeners, have a listen, and then when you do get to reading the book, think back to those songs, see what you thought. I'll take us now to the next miscellaneous question. This one is the bonus question for Patreon. I'm not sure if I was doing these last time you were on, Jeremy, but essentially I'll be snipping this out of the main episode, sticking it on the show's Patreon feed, and people who are subscribed will be able to hear it. On the main episode, we'll just hear me asking the question, and then blah, 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 some sped up noise.
So the answer has to be like extra special to make it worth.
Yeah. It's funny. Some of the questions and answers they're real gold. Other ones, I wish I'd asked a better question. So we'll see how we do here. So it's just this. What's the significance of the title? I suppose we've sort of touched on this, but what is the cocoon in the story? Because I feel like it's simultaneously hard and easy to figure out who's inside a cocoon. Is it the two mains? Is it just one of them? I don't know. What's your feeling? Well said. I think I'll close off the bonus question there. I have I don't know what is a synonym for bonus? An extra question that sort of occurred to me. So the last two episodes that I did interviews for, one was Li Peifu's Graft, which has dysfunctional romantic and family relationships, and then it was Dorvitse's short story Quarantine, which had a micro level, a sort of weird, messed up family. And that's something I've been kind of thinking about, because I think I really don't remember where it was. It might have been in the Graft interview. It might have been somewhere else. It might have been because I'm thinking about doing an episode on Dream of the Red Chamber. Something about, there was some passing comment about the influence of like a family that destroys the individual. You know, that is what sort of Dream of the Red Chamber is sort of all about. And then you see it almost, I don't know, revived in a new iteration in Bajin's novel Family. And I think whatever point I stumbled across, I don't remember who said it or who wrote it, was saying it's a motif you can sort of see in a lot of other books, entries in Chinese lit. Although then, of course, maybe that's just true for books that human beings write, because we're all from families that are at least a little bit screwed up. Do you see anything like that tradition here, or is it just a more general human thing of we're all from families, they're all at least a little bit messy?
I think it is. I have heard Yueran talk about how a lot of this is the legacy of the one-child policy. And
Right.
when you have an entire generation of only children, I think that does something for you, to you. And it's it's very fragmented. None of these people have siblings. Their parents give way too much attention to them because traditionally you have bigger families and then suddenly there's only one child to carry all the wishes and hopes of the family. So I think that exacerbates the dysfunction. There's no one to share the burden with. I mean, part of the reason Cocoon and Jiǎqi are so messed up, apart from, all the things that their families have done to them, is that they're completely isolated. For a while, they're fast friends, but then events separate them. And after that, they're completely alone. And maybe they wouldn't be if they weren't only children. But that's just one thing. Even Jiaqi's cousin, the one relative she is a little bit close to, just cannot connect with her. They're just so atomized and separate.
I had not thought of that, but now you mention it, yeah, there is a phase of the book where we have something resembling a group of kids, or I forget if they're teenagers by that point, who are sort of friends, and it reminded me of something. A friend in China, I had a Chinese friend in China who I had, I think, in my first year, just happened to mention, oh yeah, if I say brother and sister, I might mean my cousins. In fact, I must do, because I never had a brother or sister, because I'm an only child. I thought, oh yeah, that does make an awful lot of sense. So yeah, the group of friends, two of them are cousins, and Jiaqi and Chonggong, their relationship is, I feel like the book sort of maybe leads you to think, is this a will they, won't they? Is it a childhood romance that's never goes anywhere, or a childhood crush? That's a better word. That never goes anywhere, and then they're going to meet up again in the present, and then they're finally going to get married and live happily ever after. But no such thing happens, and it occurs to me now, maybe the really important thing is that just having a relationship as peers, as something playing the role of siblings, is what they really needed, because I think that's left pretty open as well. As the reader, you maybe just project on what you want them to be, if it's friends or something else.
Sure. I mean, part of this is just the expectations of a heteronormative society, where if you have
Totally
a female character, of course, that's where this is going. I just don't think Yueran's that interested in the question. And as you can see from their individual encounters, neither of them is the other's type at all. But also, because they were such close childhood friends, I think it probably would feel a bit like incest.
Yeah. Yes, I realized that was sort of in between the lines in what I was saying there. Yeah, you're right. They're not each other's type. I feel like saying why is a bit of a spoiler. So I'll take us to the wind down questions. This one I think is probably the hardest question, the hardest consistent repeating question I think I ask. And I feel that because I usually try and answer it myself as well, but whatever, we'll see where we go. If listeners want more like this book, where would you direct them?
Well, this is going to sound a bit self-serving, but just because I can't think of a better answer in the moment, Shuangshuetao's Rouge Street has a similar vibe, which is young people meeting after many years to resolve the issues and traumas of their childhood. At least that's the first of the three novellas in the story. It's about the seeds of present disaster being historical, and how you can't fix the dilemma you're in without going right back to the roots of the problem, which lie in the past.
Okay, great. A sales pitch and an app recommendation. Excellent. I'll do something self-serving in a different sense. I've noticed I have a real tendency to play up all things Scottish, my nationality, on the pod. And the first book I could think of that I felt had a similar plot and or vibe and or emotional pain to Cocoon was one I read once. I don't remember all that well. It's called The Crow Road by Ian Banks. And rather than trying to describe the vibe with ingenious, subtle language, I'll read the Wikipedia blurb at rapid speed, and listeners will probably see where I'm coming from. This building's roman is set in the fictional Argyll town of Gallanach, the real village of Lochare, and in Glasgow, where the adult Prentice McHone lives. Actually, I'm going to sort of paraphrase this to get through it faster. His uncle had disappeared 8 years ago whilst writing a book called The Crow Road, apprentice becomes obsessed with his papers and the mystery of his uncle's past. Along the way, he's got to cope with the estrangement from his father, unrequited love, sibling rivalry, and failure at his studies. The estrangement from his father is tied up with his other beliefs that clashes with his father over. There's a parallel plot where he has a gradual transition from an adolescent fixation on one young woman to a more mature love for another woman. And finally, his efforts to make sense of his uncle's notes and clues helps him understand the world and his place in it. And then the icing on the cake here for matching up with Cocoon, the narrative is non-linear, leaping back and forth with little or no warning, requiring the reader to piece things together.
Oh, I like that. You know what? I'm going to throw the Wasp Factory in there as well, because that is about like a past trauma that's only hinted at and finally needs to be confronted so that everyone can move forward.
Yeah, I hadn't thought of that either, but that is one of the only other. In fact, those two are two of the only three non-sci-fi Ian Banks I've read, and I wouldn't have thought of the Wasp Factory. But yeah, you're totally right. The use of the mystery, the piecing together of the mystery is right there. Perfect. Okay, final question. What are you reading just now?
So I'm reading a book by the Malaysian author Gong Wanhui, called 人工少女, which I don't quite know how to translate. It's not the mechanical girl exactly. I think the man-made girl is closer, but that seems a bit pointed in English, because 人工 doesn't have that connotation. So the human manufactured girl, I guess. It's about a dystopian future in which the city has been abandoned, everything is falling apart, the streets are empty. And what disaster is this? And as you read the book, you realize that it's a somewhat amplified version of March 2020. And the narrator is kind of having a really intense pandemic experience. And some of this might be hallucination or memory, or perhaps this is a fictional version of the pandemic that went a lot worse than it did. I'm still quite early on, so I don't know which of these versions it is, but I'm really into it because I think it's a pandemic novel that's also not a pandemic novel. And it's kind of using the circumstances of COVID to riff on something more deeper and mysterious, and to ask about our relationship to our families and our pasts, and the possibility of not having children and what that looks like. And there are a lot of cats in the book.
Yeah, that always helps. I hope the cats are doing okay during the pandemic.
They are. They're flourishing, actually. It's the humans who aren't doing great.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I haven't read a single pandemic novel. I guess I haven't had time to find one, unless you count the one that predicted it, Ling Ma's Severance. I don't know if do you know that one?
I do, yes.
That's one of the best books I've read in ages. It's so good. But I think I've already enthused about that one on the show. Definitely on the Patreon feed.
Well, I'll drop in a recommendation for The Last of Us, the TV adaptation, which is not a pandemic show, but might as well be.
Right. Yes, a few people at my work are watching that one, and I'm naturally skeptical of anything that's derived from a video game, but I've heard this one's good.
I mean, I haven't played the video game, so I can't compare it. I think it's a smart adaptation. There are definitely scenes that I can tell are referencing the video game because they're kind of running in a way that no one runs in real life. And also there are some things that I just kind of feel like probably were just taken straight from a cutscene. But it's also its own thing. And the way the story uses the zombie infestation, the pandemic, not as a scary thing, but a way to push human beings into extremity to see what we will do, and to show us the worst and best about ourselves is, I think, really powerfully done.
I guess I'm of the sort of age where when I was a kid, 28 Days Later had defined like the zombie movie genre. And I think I've not articulated it before, but now you say it, yeah. I've never really liked the monster of the zombie. I think it's kind of boring, but the setting of a modern zombie story is very hard to beat, I think. That's not a note I expected to end on, but That's all my questions. Before I end the recording, is there anything we've not touched on, or anything you're dying to say that's not been said?
No, I think we've said it all. I'm just, really happy that this book is out in the world. In the residency in 2011, actually, Yueran was already working on it. So I feel like I was there right at the beginning and sort of have watched it gestate and watched the book emerge from its own cocoon of creativity. And I can't wait to see what Yueran is writing next. And fingers crossed that I get to translate that too.
Likewise, yeah. This is my first year around. I'm definitely going to be trying to find some way to get a hold of the Promised Bird. Thank you very much, Jeremy, for coming on. It's been a pleasure, just like last time.
Likewise, thank you for having me. Always great fun.
Absolutely. And we've reached the end of the episode. A huge thank you to Jeremy for coming back on the show. If you really enjoyed listening to him talk, then do go back to the Strange Beasts of China episode where he's on with the author he translated, Yang, talking to me, obviously. That is a very fun episode. I am not going to dilly-dally here. I am just going to say, if you enjoy the show and want to give feedback or find ways to connect with me or indeed with other listeners, there's a whole lot of social media links in the show description, which I usually call the show notes. But here's the handles, just if you want them in your ear right now. The show's podcast Instagram. That's a redundant doubling. Let's just say the show's Instagram account is at TrChFic, at TrChFic. On Twitter, it's just me, basically. So at Angus Likes Words. There is a show Discord. There's a join link to that in the show notes. It's a very quiet Discord, TBH. But if you want to throw out a question to other listeners and to me, that's a good place to do it. Of course, the best thing you can do, as always, is to spread the word. Tell your friend. Tell your teacher. Tell your grandfather as he lies in a coma with a nail embedded somewhere in his skull. Gosh, that's a bit dark, isn't it? Because maybe he can hear you and maybe he can't. Sorry to put that one out there, but we are going to have to end on that. Really sorry. So until the next episode, 再见。